Good morning and welcome to this week's episode of Mystery, Murder, and Magic. We're your hosts, Andrea and Alex.
Yes. We're here.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, we know that the Black Dahlia case has been talked about repeatedly, but I just could not do an episode on it because it's a case that I've been kind of obsessed with for as long as I can remember, and I think we've waited long enough, avoiding talking about it.
Yeah.
Now it's our turn to talk about
Our
it.
turn. We gotta do our rendition of it.
Exactly. So who was Elizabeth Short? She was born on July 29, 1924, in the Hyde Park area of Boston, Massachusetts. She was the third of 5 daughters born to Cleo and Phoebe May Sawyer Short. When Elizabeth was 3, the family moved to Medford, Massachusetts, where she was raised and spent the majority of her life. Now, up until the stock market
crashed, it didn't.
In 1929, Elizabeth's dad built mini golf courses. I didn't even know they had putt-putt and mini golf back then.
It's not a revolutionary new thing, though.
No, I know, but I just didn't realize it had been around that long.
Forever.
But that's what he did before the stock market crashed. And when the market crashed, he lost most of his savings, and the family was broke. Now, in 1930, her dad's car was found abandoned on the Charlestown Bridge. And so it was assumed he had killed himself by jumping into the Charles River below. So Elizabeth's mom packed up the kids, and they moved into a small apartment in Medford. And her mom, Phoebe, she worked as a bookkeeper to support her family.
She keeps books.
Yes.
Books.
When Elizabeth was 15, she underwent surgery due to bronchitis and severe asthma attacks. And at that time, the doctors recommended that she move to a milder climate during the winter months so that she didn't suffer have to keep suffering with breathing issues.
Yeah.
So her mom would send her to spend winters in Miami, Florida with family and friends. That would be pretty cool. Be a golden girl in it. Now, the rest of the year, she would live in Medford with her mom and sisters. And she did that for about 3 years. Now, during her sophomore year of high school, she dropped out of school. Now, fast forward to 1942, and her mom, Phoebe, received an apology letter from her assumed dead husband.
Oh, God.
Yeah. He just was not even dead. He revealed in the letter that not only was he still alive, but he started a whole new life in California.
Oh,
I think that's kind of dirty because...
that's pretty dirty.
During the Depression, it was hard to find jobs, and, Elizabeth's mom, Phoebe, was pretty fortunate to have found that bookkeeping job during that time period because jobs were so scarce.
Yeah.
And for him to have just ditched his family like that, plus making them believe that he was dead the entire time, that's just sad. I can't imagine doing my family that way.
Exactly.
Now, the following December, after they found out that the dad was still alive, Elizabeth was 18 years old, and she relocated to Vallejo, California to live with her dad. Now, keep in mind, she hadn't seen him since she was 6 years old. Shortly after she moved west and was living with her dad, they started having arguments. So, in January 1943, which was only about a month after she moved in with him, she moved out and she took a job at what is now the Vandenberg Air Force Base. And she lived with several friends. And there was also an Army Air Force sergeant that she had lived with, and it was rumored that he had abused her. In mid-1943, she left that area for Santa Barbara, and on September 23rd, 1943, She was arrested for underage drinking at a bar, so the juvenile authorities in California sent her back. They wanted her to go back to Medford in Massachusetts, but instead of moving back to Medford, she moved to Florida. While she was living in Florida, she met Major Michael Matthew Gordon Jr., and he was a decorated Army Air Force officer. When they met, he was training to be deployed to India, and this was all going on during World War II. While he was recovering from injuries that he sustained in an airplane crash while he was in India, he wrote to Elizabeth and asked for her hand in marriage. She accepted, but sadly, before they could get married, he was killed in a second airplane crash less than a week before the whole war ended. Yeah.
That's
I mean, it would be horrible to get killed at any point during a war.
or at all.
But right before it ended, you know?
I know. Like,
Now, we're going to go a little bit further to July of 1946. And now she's relocated to Los Angeles, California. And she moved there to visit Army Air Force Lieutenant Joseph Gordon Fickling. And she had met him while they were both in Florida. He was now stationed at the Naval Reserve Air Base in Long Beach. Elizabeth spent the last 6 months of her life living in Southern California and worked as a waitress, and she rented a room behind the Florentine Gardens nightclub. Some say she was an aspiring actress, but she had no known acting jobs or credits to her name. Now, Elizabeth's naked body was discovered on the morning of January 15th, 1947. She was only 22 years old. Now, I do have to say what I'm about to tell you is a little bit disturbing, so if you have a weak stomach, you might want to fast forward just a minute or two. Her body had been severed in half at the waist, and she was severely mutilated. Her body had been discovered in a vacant lot on South Norton Avenue by a woman named Betty Bersinger, who was out walking with her 3-year-old daughter. I can't even imagine walking with my kid and finding like a body, especially one that was like so just grotesquely mutilated like Elizabeth was. Now, at first she thought Elizabeth's body was a discarded store mannequin, but when she realized it was actually the remains of a human, she ran to a nearby house and she called the police. Now, not only was her body severed in half, but the body had been drained of all of its blood, leaving her skin a ghostly white, pale white.
yeah.
Her face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears, which created what was called the Glasgow smile. She had multiple cuts on her breast and thighs, and in some places, entire portions of flesh had been cut away. The lower half of her body had been positioned about a foot away from the upper half, and whoever had left her there had taken the time to position her intestines neatly under her buttocks.
That's horrible, but
I
just the way.
I said buttocks, and
Yeah.
Alex has always had a problem with that word. Anyway, she had been left in a pose with her legs spread and her arms over her head with the elbows bent at right angles. Near her body, detectives found a heel print and a cement sack containing watery blood. The next day, an autopsy was performed by Los Angeles coroner Frederick Newbar. The autopsy showed that there were ligature marks on her ankles, wrists, and neck, and there was an irregular laceration with superficial tissue loss on her right breast, meaning that somebody had whoever did this like sliced
Everything.
flesh
Yeah.
away from her right breast. There was also superficial cuts on her right forearm, left upper arm, and the lower left side of her chest. The lower half of her body had been removed by transecting the lumbar spine, between the second and third lumbar vertebrae, and in doing so, the intestine was severed at the duodenum, and that's a part of the intestine. I'm not exactly sure what it does, but I've heard of it before.
Yeah.
Because there was very little bruising at the incision, Newbar suggested that this took place after her death. Her skull had not been fractured, but it was noted that on the front and right side of her scalp, there was a small amount of bleeding in the cushion space, which is consistent to blows to the head. He listed her cause of death was from the hemorrhaging from the lacerations on her face, I guess when they slashed like from her mouth to her ears, and the shock from the blows to her head and face. Yeah. There was also some evidence to insinuate that she had been raped. I don't know what kind of person, I would say a sick person, to do something like this. I mean, seriously. And also, it was, I don't know. I just can't even, I don't know. It would have to be just out of your mind crazy. But anyway, 6 days after her body had been discovered, a person claiming to be Elizabeth's killer called the editor of the newspaper, it's the Los Angeles Examiner. The person on the phone congratulated the paper on its coverage of the case and that eventually he would turn himself in, but first he wanted the police to chase him a little longer. He also told the editor to expect some souvenirs of Beth Shorts in the mail. On January 24th, a postal worker discovered a manila envelope that was addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers. A large message on the front of the envelope said, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." The envelope contained Elizabeth's birth certificate, business cards, photographs, names written on pieces of paper, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen on the cover of it. Despite the sender's effort to clean the envelope, partial fingerprints were lifted and sent to the FBI. Now, gasoline was how the killer had cleaned Elizabeth's body, and then they found that that's how that envelope had been killed. So they were pretty sure, they felt pretty sure that that was truly her killer who had sent the envelope. But unfortunately, the fingerprints were unusable because they had become compromised. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but when they were being sent to the FBI, something happened with them, so they couldn't make a positive ID from them. They couldn't be used. On March the 14th, a suicide note was found tucked into a shoe on a pile of men's clothing that was found on the beach on Breeze Avenue. The note read, "To whom it may concern, I have waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia murder, but I have not. I am too much of a coward to turn myself in. So this is the best way out for me. I couldn't help myself for that or this. Sorry, Mary." I don't know who Mary is. The clothes gave no identity to the owner. I guess they didn't find like a license or any kind of ID in the clothes, or like any. Well, of course, back then they didn't do the DNA thing, so I don't even know if they preserved anything from that suit of clothes that they found. Now, police quickly started investigating the name that was found on the front of the address book, which was Mark Hansen. Now, Hansen was the wealthy owner of a nightclub and a theater that was there in Los Angeles. He also happened to be an acquaintance of Elizabeth. She and friends had actually stayed in his home, and one of her friends and her roommate, her name was Ann Toth, she told investigators that Hansen had a potential cause to kill Elizabeth because recently Elizabeth had rejected sexual advances from him. Eventually he was cleared of her murder, though, and in the following weeks the LAPD, get this, interviewed over 150 men.
Oh my God.
Yeah, who they had believed were potential suspects.
Oh my God.
Several people who were listed in the address book that they had found, they were also interviewed, but one by one, they were all cleared. Now, in the beginning stages of the investigation, and this is something that blew my mind for back in that time, in the beginning stages of the investigation, a total of 750 investigators worked on the case. 750 investigators. And in 750 investigators, they could not solve this murder. But anyway, various places were searched for additional evidence, but none was ever found. And there was a city councilman by the name of Lloyd G. Davis who put up a $10,000 reward, which was a lot of money for back in the 40s. He put up that reward for information leading to the killer. And how about several people came forward? I don't know what they thought they were going to do with the money, if they had actually thought they had killed somebody. But anyway, they came forward with confessions, but police dismissed them as being false. And they even charged some of them with obstructing justice. Who the heck comes up and says, which, I mean, all they saw was those dollar signs, I guess. But, I mean, obviously I don't think they would, give it to the killer, you know?
Yeah.
On February the 1st, the Los Angeles Daily News reported that the LAPD had hit a stone wall with no new leads. Lead investigator Captain Jack Donahue told reporters in interviews that he believed that the murder had taken place in a remote building or a shack on the outskirts of Los Angeles, and her body was transported to where it was found. Because of the precision of the incisions, the LAPD looked into the possibility that the murderer may have been a doctor, a surgeon, or someone with medical knowledge. In mid-February, they served a warrant at the University of Southern California Medical School, which was located very close to where her body had been discovered. And the police requested a list of the program's students, and the school said they would give it to them as long as their identities would remain private. They did background checks on all of those students, and they didn't get any leads out of that at all, and they cleared them all. So here it is, 2021, and it's 74 years after the murder, and no one has ever been arrested for the brutal murder of Elizabeth Short. Now, back in 2017, there was a book published called Black Dahlia, Red Rose. It was written by Pugh Eatwell, and it focused on a person by the name of Leslie Dillon. Now, this person's theory really makes a lot of sense to me. Dillon was a bellhop, and he was also a former mortician's assistant, so he probably had some medical knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Now, one of Leslie Dillon's associates was Mark Hansen, that name that was on the front of that address book. Now, the lady that wrote this book suggested that Elizabeth was murdered because she knew too much about Hansen's and Dillon's plan to rob hotels. She went on to suggest that Elizabeth was murdered at the Astor Motel in Los Angeles because the owners had reportedly found a room at their motel covered in blood and fecal matter on the same morning that Elizabeth's body had been found. But for some reason, the police said that it was not connected. It makes no sense. I mean, I think it's worth looking into. I mean, I still wonder if they collected blood from that scene at that motel, though, because now they have the technology, to do DNA to see if that was Elizabeth's blood that was all over that room. You know?
Yeah.
I don't know. Sounds kind of like there was some kind of cover-up going on, too, but that's just my opinion. And how did she earn the nickname of the Black Dahlia? Well, there's several ideas about that. One is that she received the nickname from staff and customers at a Long Beach drugstore in mid-1946 as a wordplay on a film that was released around that time called The Blue Dahlia. And I believe that the black probably came because Elizabeth had jet black hair. Let's see. Now, there was another thought that the media crafted that name because it was known that Elizabeth loved to adorn her hair with dahlias. But according to the FBI's official website, she received the first part of that nickname from the press for her rumored love of sheer black clothing. So, there's just multiple theories on how she got that nickname. Now, she was buried in the Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland, California. After her sisters had grown up and married, their mother, Phoebe, moved to Oakland to be close to her daughter's grave. However, she moved back to the East Coast in the 1970s, and she lived to be in her 90s before she passed away. A side note from all of this is 2 weeks after Elizabeth's murder, a Republican state assemblyman from California, his name was C. Don Field, was inspired by the Elizabeth Short case to introduce a bill calling for the formation of a sex offender registry, making California the first state to make the registration for sex offenders mandatory. So that's how the first sex offender registry came about.
It's crazy.
Now, this case has been featured in a lot of books and movies and TV shows. Some of them, they've fictionalized the story and, blown it all up. But there's some others that are fact-based, I guess you could say. Now, one such show that has featured the Elizabeth Smart case is a favorite show of mine, and it's American Horror Story.
Yeah.
In 2011, Mina Savari played Elizabeth, and the episode that was featured on was the Spooky Little Girl episode. And then in 2018, they featured Elizabeth Smart again on the Return to Murder House. And I don't know why you don't watch these shows with me, because some seasons haven't been that good, but most of them have, and I can't wait until July when the new stuff starts. But anyway, I just got sidetracked from all of that. Well, that's all we have for today's episode. Don't forget to come back Wednesday for the Midweek Mini, and again on Saturday with the Weekend Weird Files. Y'all have a really great week.